Hello, this is my favorite video of the year to film. It's just a celebration of everything that I accomplished last year. Not everything, it's literally just the books I read. But to me, it means a lot. So last year I read a total of 52 books. My goal was 50 and I read 52, which is technically a book for every week. It didn't actually work out that way. So I'm gonna go over all the juicy statistics of all of the books that I read and all that fun stuff. So this is my favorite, all the juicy data that I've harvested, mined from my own life. So it's okay if it's my data, right? This is actually the third year that I filmed this video, which is crazy. The first year was 2017 and I read, I think 30 something books, maybe 40 books. I actually don't even remember. And then last year, 2018, I read 60 books, which was crazy. By far my largest number of books read in a year. And last year, definitely my most difficult year of probably my entire adult existence, was 52 books, which is quite the accomplishment, I feel like, considering the year. So that's very exciting. This year, my goal is, you'll have to wait till the end of the video. I'll tell you at the end of the video this year's goal. So if you don't know, I'm a huge book reader. I just read a lot. I talk about books a lot, both here. I have videos that are dedicated to books and on stream. I actually have a books Instagram where I just post pictures of my books. I also have a books YouTube, which I feel like I think about way more than I ever do anything with. There are like 4 videos from many years ago. We're not gonna go down that road today. Today is just about the books that I read last year. So let's dive right into it. So if you haven't noticed, this is a change of scenery as well. So this is my library. I love this section of my house. It's actually right next to my living room. And this is my books collection. Maybe one day I'll do like a bookshelf tour. This will probably be a video perfect for the books channel, not for my tech channel, which you guys don't really care about. This is like my favorite video to film, but it's not usually my most viewed channel. Let's just jump into it. One quick thing. I think in 2017 when I did this video, I did it in the order of which I read the books, and it was kind of, I felt like it lacked organization. So last year I did it by genre, and I felt like that was way more coherent. So I'm going to do the same thing this time. I'm going to do it by genre. Before I jump into the books, let's discuss the moneymaker here, the stats. So this is a combination of stats from both Goodreads, and then I also have a form that I have created in Google Forms. It's actually from somebody else and I've kind of tweaked it to be my own. And I put all of my books in the form, and then it gives me all the charts and graphs that you're about to see here. My shortest book was, not surprisingly, the only graphic novel that I read. That's actually not the surprising part. The surprising part is that I only read 1 graphic novel this year, but the non-surprising part is that this is the shortest book that I read, and that is Batman: The Killing Joke by Alan Moore. Alan Moore is a legend. This book is quite well known, and so I read it before going to see the Joker, and both are fantastic, the movie and The Killing Joke. Highly recommend both, but this is the shortest book that I read this year. The longest book, no surprise, is Stephen King, The Institute. This book is a hefty book. However, I don't know what it is with Stephen King. He has just perfected his writing so well that his books, while gigantic, go so quickly. I think I read this in like 2 days. So yes, it is the longest book that I read. However, it definitely didn't take me the longest. I always do a breakdown of the age range of the books, whether it's like a young, middle-aged book, which sometimes I go back and read books from like that I read in school growing up, just to remember what they were like. Then young adult, and then of course adult books. This is actually surprising because this year I read only adult books. I don't know how that happened. I definitely didn't plan it. I usually sneak in a few fun young adult books. However, this year, 0, which is crazy because last year I read 7 young adult books. This year, nope, none. So I'm gonna try to do better because I do like to mix in young adult. If anyone doesn't know, young adult doesn't mean it's targeted towards young adults. It actually just means that the main characters in the book are young adults. So I'm definitely gonna try to fit some more in this year. As far as nonfiction versus fiction, this is actually a pretty even split, which is not surprising. I kind of go back and forth between fiction versus nonfiction, or I make an effort to kind of split it up. This year just happened to be more nonfiction. I had 27 nonfiction books and 25 fiction books. The last book I read was nonfiction, so it kind of pushed it a little ahead. The interesting thing is that last year in 2018, it was actually switched and I read 34 fiction books and 26 nonfiction books. So that's a pretty big difference. 8 more books of fiction last year. And this year, I think it's because I read so many tech books. As far as publication year, I do also make an effort to try to read current published, that's what I was looking for, currently published books, just to keep up on like what's going on, what people are reading, you know, stay up on new trends, that kind of stuff. So this year I read 20 books that were published in 2019. All the rest were published 2018 and earlier. It's actually kind of funny because last year I had almost the exact same number. I had 21 published in 2018 than I read in 2018. So apparently I like to read 20 books that are published in that year. Now this one is actually really fascinating. This year I read way more paper books than I ever have. So I always like to try before I buy, and so a lot of times I will borrow books from the library if I like it. If I feel like this is a book that I want to keep in my collection, then I will go and purchase it. But this year I actually made a lot of risky purchases and purchased physical books from the bookstore for the first time in a long time. The crazy thing here is that in 2018 I only read six physical books. So I went from 6 to 29. I think it's also been an effort to build my collection up too, because I know a lot of people are like, just read Kindle books. You know, they have all different arguments, but me, I take great joy in the books that I have in my collection. Just looking at them makes me happy. It helps trigger the memories of reading the books. It also reminds me that I have some books that I still need to read. There are a lot of books on these shelves that I haven't read yet. I think it's kind of half and half actually. So I love my bookshelves. And then as far as the genres, I read 7 contemporary fiction, 3 literary fiction, 5 sci-fi, 4 fantasy, 4 manga, graphic novels. I kind of group them together because it's really just 3 manga, 1 graphic novel, 2 romance. I always try to sneak some romance in there, even though I freaking hate romance books so much. I just like need the romance books to remind myself that I hate romance books. Mission accomplished. So that was a total of 25 fiction books. Then 8 general nonfiction. These are just books that they didn't really have a subcategory. I just kind of threw them into general nonfiction. 7 tech specific books. This includes all the security books that I read too. 7 biographies and 5 science specific books. And that gives me the 27 nonfiction. Whew, man, I love seeing all of that sweet, sweet data, especially since this is the 2nd year in a row that I've been collecting that data and information. So, oh my goodness, if I can just keep doing this, keep up with that, it's gonna be so crazy to see my book stats and everything going forward for however long I live in this life. So since there are 52 books here, I'm definitely not going to go into each and every single one of them. I'm just going to point out if I recommend it, if I don't recommend it, or maybe a little detail or something about it. But like I said, not everything, because for time, this will be an hour-long video if I go into every single one of these. So I'm going to start with contemporary fiction. I had 7 books in this genre, 3 of which I have physically. So to start with, I'll start with one of my favorite ones out of this whole bunch entirely. That is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Mushega. This is by far one of my favorite books that I read this year. It is not for everyone though. I read a lot of depressing books this year. I don't know why. I mean, I could probably tell you why, but I have a thing for depressing things, sad songs, depressing movies, depressing books. Yeah, don't ask, but they do make me happy in a weird way. Anyway, it's just a very different book. It's very unique. The writing is fantastic, and I just truly loved it. Moving on to book 2 of contemporary fiction, Supermarket by Logic. I don't recommend this book. It's not very well written. And then my last physical book of contemporary fiction, The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. This is another one of my favorite reads that I read this year. Also about suicide, depressing, but loved it nonetheless. And there is a Great Dane in it, and I love dogs, so It also was a National Book Award finalist, so at least I wasn't alone. So jumping into Kindle format, I read An American Marriage by Carrie Jones. This was a highly acclaimed read. A lot of people recommend it. Not my favorite read, but it was a good read. Then I read There by Tommy Orange, another one that I feel like a lot of people were talking about it. It was buzzworthy. However, definitely not one of my favorites. Then I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, another one, not my favorite, was buzzed about, ended up on a lot of end of the year best books of the year, and I did not like it at all. It was super boring, just dull, had 0 point. And maybe that was the point of it. I don't like books like that. Give me a point, I need a point. And then to round up the 7th book of this category, On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and another one that was just not for me. I mean, I tell you I like depressing books, but I guess there's a limit, or maybe I just reached a point. This is what I read this one near the end of the year. Maybe I had just reached a point where I was kind of over the sad books. And so maybe this was just poorly timed for me, because this is another one, it got another claim, and I did not enjoy it. It is kind of interesting that in this category of contemporary fiction, 2 of the 7 books were my favorites of the whole year. 4 were like my least favorite books of the year, and 1 was kind of like meh. Moving on to literary fiction, I have 3 in this category, and once again I will start with the physical books. I read Cormac McCarthy by Blood Meridian. I love Cormac McCarthy. One of my goals is to read all of his books because he's a very unique writer. He's very difficult to read the way he writes. I actually started this years ago, and it took me a few tries to get into it. This year I finally restarted it and finished it, and oh my goodness. A lot of people will say that this is like one of their favorite books ever written. This isn't my favorite book. However, I can see why. This book has so much in it. It is so beautiful while also being completely destructive. Definitely only read this book if you are not too sensitive to violence. Speaking of brutality, next up, my last of literary fiction, and one of my favorite books that I read this year, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Unfortunately, this isn't my favorite cover. I swear I ordered this on Amazon, and this is one of the reasons why I hate ordering on Amazon now, but I swear it had a different cover, and then I get this cover, which, I mean, I guess we can appreciate it for the simplicity of it. But the reason why I love this book, it's not for the violence. I'm not that crazy. But it is so beautifully written. Almost like how Blood Meridian is written so well, but totally different. This is written almost like poetry. The way he talks about the stock market, the way people wear suits and fashion, and all these different, like, completely pointless topics are just so well done in this book. And I actually want to read more of his books, so to see if the writing holds up or if it was just special for American Psycho, but definitely 100% one of my favorite books that I read this year. But I don't recommend it. Don't read it. And then the last literary fiction book I read was The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. Another one that was highly acclaimed and on the charts for a very long time. It's a good book, obviously very sad considering the subject matter. But it was good. Now moving into one of my favorite genres, and that is sci-fi. And in fact, this year I do have a goal to read more sci-fi. Once again, starting with the physical copies of sci-fi. I have 5 in this genre, 4 of which I own. I will start with I'll start with this one. This is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Probably my favorite sci-fi book that I read this year. Deals with quantum physics and the superposition, 2 things that I love to read about very, very much. And then also by the same author, he released this one this year. This is Recursion by Blake Crouch. It deals with time travel and it's kind of a mind-bending concept. I do recommend this one. I don't think it's as good as Dark Matter, but that doesn't say it's bad. Then of course I already talked about Stephen King because he's the longest book that I read this year. This is The Institute. Then the last physical copy, one that very many people are familiar with. This is The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, and I think it's ultimate because it has all the different stories, but I just read the first one, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I actually did this one on audiobook, which is actually hilarious, and I enjoyed it. And then the last book I read was actually on Kindle. I got it from the library, and that is Exhalation. It's a book of short stories by Ted Chiang, and I highly recommend this book too. Absolutely loved it. Probably at the top of my list of favorite books that I read this year. Some of the short stories in there are mind-blowing. They're so creative, well written. They're all sci-fi short stories too. I want to go back and read his previous book of short stories as well, because I've heard that's really good as well. But this is a great one if you just kind of want to read maybe a story every few days or something. It's short, it's wonderful, enjoyable, highly recommend. All right, we're getting through this. The next series, fantasy, is crazy to me that I didn't read any fantasy books until the very end of the year when the Witcher series was coming out, and I was like, oh no, I need to read The Witcher. And in fact, I'm missing one of the books. I have 5 of the books. I don't know where the 5th one is. I don't know where I put it. So I've read all of the Witcher series. Well, actually, this is not true. I haven't read this one. What do I have this here? I read The Last Wish, which I don't see it anywhere. I must have put it somewhere weird. Anyway, so The Last Wish is the first book of short stories. I read these completely out of order. Don't do what I did. I read all of the novels first. Those are 1, 2, 3 of the novels, but it's actually 4, 5, and 6 of the books. The Last Wish is the first book, but it's a group of short stories. And then Sword of Destiny is book 2, but it's also a book of short stories. So I've read half of this, but I have finished these, and then I have to go and read, this is 3, 4, 5, I had to read 6 and 7. It's very confusing. All to say though, the Witcher books are freaking fantastic. I absolutely loved them. I loved the show. I cannot wait for season 2. I'm so sad it's gonna be till 2021. It sounds so far away, but I flew through both of them. So that's fantasy. Now into manga and graphic novels. I read Uzumaki. I was going for a theme of terrible books, obviously. Blood Meridian, American Psycho, a bunch of other books that I read that dealt with shootings and murder and that. My brain is just well gone this year, but Uzumaki definitely holds that up as well. This book is brutal, but it's all, art-based, so it makes it okay. This book is terrifying, the concepts in it, and beautiful in the same way. I know there's a movie based on it as well. I haven't watched it though, so maybe one day I'll do that. There's actually 3 books in here, so I just bought the mega collection that includes all 3. I just think this is actually a beautiful cover too. I think this probably takes the cake of most beautiful book that I read this year. I just love this cover. I really like the artwork too. I don't know if I can even show some of the things that are in here. They're just very strange, very, very strange. So if you like strange, I highly recommend this. This is kind of like a cult classic, I think. And then of course the last graphic novel, or actually only graphic novel I already mentioned, was Batman the Killing Joke by Alan Moore. Highly recommend, must read, highly suggested, go do it. One of the best graphic novels probably out there completely ever. Alan Moore, I mean, I don't need to say more. Well, to wrap up fiction, I did read 2 romance novels, Fix Her Up and The Northern Lights Lodge. I have read the Northern Lights Lodge author Julie Kaplan. I've read one of her books before, I think in 2017, and I really enjoyed it. This book I didn't really enjoy, and Fix Her Up was absolutely terrible. Probably my least favorite book of the whole entire year. It was horrible. I only finished it just to see if it ever redeemed itself, but no, it was terrible the entire time. And once again, I'm reminded that I don't like romance books. They're ridiculous. I'm sorry if you do like romance. They're just not for me. Clearly, I just like violence and really horrible things. Moving into nonfiction, the dominator of the year. So in general, nonfiction, these are just books that I didn't really classify in a bigger category, but they are nonfiction books. I have 8 total, 3 of which I have physically, 5 of which I read on Kindle. The first book in this category is The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. I highly recommend this book if you consider yourself a highly sensitive person who gets overstimulated by situations or people or just noises, things around you, your environment, things of that sort. I think this is a fabulous book. I definitely put myself in that category. I'm an extreme introvert. I like to socialize and go out with people, but I definitely need my time to re-energize myself. This book is definitely, I highly recommend for people like that. We are sometimes overtuned to take things in and it affects us. And so this book helps combat that. Highly recommend it. In fact, I might do a video on this just because I think it might help people, even though it has nothing to do with my channel. The next book I read is Embrace Your Weird by Felicia Day. This book is definitely aimed more towards, I feel like, younger generation who are trying to more so figure themselves out. I think this book is good, but only for certain people. I found value in it, but kind of limited. And then the last physical book I own in this category is Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. I've read most of his books and I do normally like them. This one, I felt like it was a little lackluster. He's very big on stoicism and I feel like he was kind of reaching a little bit on this one. Like I said, not my favorite Ryan Holiday, but I do like his other books. The other books I read in this category are The Library Book by Susan Orlean about the LA Public Library having a huge fire in 1986 that a lot of people don't even know about because it actually happened at the exact same time as Chernobyl. So obviously Chernobyl trumped the news over this huge fire in the public library that remains unsolved. And it's a really good book, very well written. I love libraries. And so I feel like this was a good book about it. Then I read Make Your Bed by William McRaven. This is a great book that kind of just sets up some good practices to start your day off. And one being, make your bed when you get up. I do this every day. I've been doing it for very, very many years and I highly recommend it. It's a great way to start the day off with an instant win. Then I read The Four Horsemen. This is actually a book that is made from a conversation of the Four Horsemen, who are Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris. Four very interesting people who have very interesting books and a lot of interesting things to say. Unfortunately, Christopher Hitchens is no longer with us, but the other three are still living and thriving, and so is Sassy with her toy. Then I read Eat the Frog by Brian Tracy. I actually own this book, but I have used and abused this book so much. Even though it's kind of like cheesy, 21 ways to stop procrastinating or whatever, it actually has really good tips of how to organize your life, and I definitely need that sometimes because I have so much going on in my head and elsewhere that I need something to kind of rein it all in. And this book does that. Fantastic. Highly recommend if you are like that as well. Then I read Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. I normally am a fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I liked Outliers. However, this book definitely was a miss for me. I understand what he was going for about talking to people before jumping to conclusions. However, I felt like it was kind of a stretch with some of the stories. I just wasn't a really fan of it. It was another kind of triggering book that just dealt with a lot of social issues that are not fun. We gotta wrap this up, baby girl. Every time I get up, I move my chair and I don't know where it was. Like I've probably been all over in this video. All right, now one of my favorite categories of the year. I read 7 tech books, by far my year of reading the most tech books, 6 of which I actually own. The 7th, I feel like it makes sense why I don't own it, but we'll get into that when we get there. So to rattle through these, Don't Be Evil by Rana Foroohar. Highly recommend this book. It is about the FAANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. The 5 books that I did a whole video on, security books. Gray Day by Eric O'Neill, about the first cyber spy. Then Countdown to Zero by Kim Zetter about Stuxnet. Dawn of the Code War by John P. Carlin, about how we are pretty much in a code war right now and how cyber warfare is a thing, will be a thing, and it's all crazy. We're doomed. Ghosts in the Wires by Kevin Mitnick, probably one of the best books about social engineering and how it can get you in prison. Of course, he's out now and has his own company. Breaking and Entering, the story of a hacker called Alien by Jeremy Smith. I like this book just because I feel like it was kind of like a character study on what it's like to be a hacker, grow up, learn, and evolve, and eventually start your own business as well. And so those are the 5 security books. The last tech book that I read was Bitcoin Billionaires by, actually I don't know the author, by Ben Mesrit. This was a really interesting book because I didn't really know this side of the story. Then jumping into biography, we have 7 biographies, 4 of which I own, 3 of which I read on Kindle, no, 2 of which I read on Kindle, 1 of which was audiobook. I read Ali Wong, Dear Girls. This is her biography, kind of, written to her 2 young daughters who were both in her womb while she did stand-up shows. And if you don't know Ali Wong, I highly recommend checking out her Netflix series. She's fantastic, also has a movie on Netflix, and just hilarious. Seems like an awesome person. And I read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This is a good book that'll give you a good kick in the booty because he is no nonsense, no BS, just kind of goes ham at life and may inspire you to do the same. I thought this was a great book about not making excuses. You're not going to win every battle you fight, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and give it your best. Then, of course, I read Snowden's book, A Permanent Record. I keep telling people, I feel like this is an important read or necessary read if you don't know the story of Snowden. This is a good way to kind of catch up because it's all encompassing. It has everything from his life to what happened, what went down, what he's doing now, and that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is an important topic to talk about, and this is a good book. The only thing I will say, there's a big portion of it that's like his childhood, the reason for his last name, things of that sort. So maybe not all the most important stuff that you can get from the story. Then this book, I actually listened to the audiobook, but then I ended up buying it because I loved it so much, and that's Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman by Richard Feynman, the famous physicist. Hilarious person, and I feel like his YouTube videos, which you can watch because they're recorded, but they're obviously really old, but they were just so fantastic and funny. And even if you don't know anything about physics, I highly recommend both reading his biography and catching any of his older lectures. The Feynman lectures are very famous and on YouTube, and so I do recommend checking them out if you haven't already. To wrap up biography with my remaining Kindle books, I read It's Not Yet Dark by Simon Fitzmaurice, and it's a sad book about him being young and dying of cancer. Then I read My Own Devices by Dessa. Honestly, I have no idea who Dessa was when I read this book. I don't even know why I read it. I honestly can't even tell you, but I read it and it was interesting. Then I read Flat Broke with Two Goats by Jennifer Megaha. I thought this book was okay. Kind of struggled with it at times. So that wraps up biography, and then into our last category, science. So I read 5 science books, 4 of which I own, 1 of which I read on Kindle. First one, Hacking Darwin by Jamie Metzl. I love this book. If you like to read about CRISPR, genetic hacking, or gene hacking, I guess, genetic engineering. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, I highly recommend this book. It was fabulous. It's kind of crazy what we're going to see in the future with genetic engineering and CRISPR and all these insane concepts that are not far away. I highly recommend just kind of knowing what's going on in the world of genes, DNA, I don't know. Then I read The Soul of the Octopus. This is actually the last book I read for the year, and this is by Cy Montgomery. I love octopuses. I think they're the coolest, one of the coolest animals on the planet. They really look like they don't even belong on the planet. They're just, I don't know, really awesome. They're super smart, and I think there's a lot we can learn from them, and that's exactly what this book was about. I really enjoyed it. The writing was fantastic, and it was a nice way to end the year. And then the last 2 books are actually by the same author with my name, Caitlin Dougherty. This is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, which is a hilarious book. She answered some questions that children wrote into her about death, and one of the questions was, will my cat eat my eyeballs if you die and nobody finds your body and your cat's hungry and your eyelids are soft? And yeah, anyway. And then I read her other book, From Here to Eternity. I actually read this one first and then the other one second, but yep, same author. This is about, she kind of travels all over the world, seeing how different cultures deal with death. And then the last one I read was a Kindle book, Lab Girl by Hope Jaron. And it was a good book. I felt like I wanted more science, and she gave more personal, if that makes sense. But it was an interesting read. And that does it. That wraps up my full 2019 of reading 52 books. Now, I said at the beginning of the video, I was going to tell you my book goal for 2020, and here it is. My book goal for 2020 is to read 100 books. I don't know if it's going to be possible. It's all going to depend on like what I end up doing with my life throughout the next year, which don't ask because I have no idea. But I'm hoping it's possible. I already read one book, so we're off to a good start, and I have a bunch of other ones going. So I think we can do it. If I read 52 last year and 60 the year before, I think I can push it to 100. We'll see. I feel like it is a hefty goal. I think it's one of those goals you kind of have to work up towards. I feel like I'm at that point where now I might be able to hit it. So if this is the one chance in my life to do that, I'm going to give it my best effort. So as always, I share all of my books that I've read on my books Instagram. It is called Caitlin's Book List. It's also linked down below in the description box if you want to follow me, follow my journey throughout the next year on there. Another year done, another year on the books, another video complete. I'm so excited to be able to share these videos with you. Like I said, I know they're not the most viewed, but if you stuck around to the end, I really do appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing what books you read throughout the next year. If you have any recommendations, do let me know. I have also added my Goodreads profile in the description box below. If you want to be friends on there, do friend me. I love having more friends on there to see what they're reading and share books and all that good stuff. So thanks again so much for watching this video. I love you all. Thank you. Goodbye.